The alarm began with a single sharp chime, the kind reserved for emergencies no one wants to name. It cut through the quiet of Gate C-19 like a blade, and for a moment every head in the waiting area lifted at once. The glass windows shook with the wind howling off Lake Michigan, but the real shiver came from the sight unfolding near the jet bridge, a man in a charcoal overcoat standing perfectly still, while two uniformed airport officers approached him from opposite sides, their hands already resting on their belts as if a decision had been made before they ever laid eyes on him. Leonard Brooks didn't move. His breath drew in slow measured. He'd heard the officer's words clearly, "Sir, we need you to step aside. There seems to be an issue with your boarding authorization." Issue. A word that could mean anything when spoken just loud enough for strangers to hear, but soft enough to deny later. Passengers whispered behind him. A suitcase zipper caught on fabric. Someone coughed long and uncomfortable. The entire concourse felt like it leaned toward him, waiting for the kind of drama that older Americans had seen too many times on the evening news. Leonard turned his head. His eyes were calm, too calm, like someone who already knew the ending of a story others were only beginning to read. He said nothing. The younger officer, barely in his 20s, cleared his throat and tried again, a little softer. "Sir, if you come with us, we can sort this out privately." But the older officer, Sergeant Hale, a man with weather-beaten hands and a jaw set like concrete, didn't bother softening anything. He looked Leonard up and down, then glanced at the boarding pass in his gloved hand. "I've seen this before," he muttered. "Paperwork doesn't match the profile. Happens more than folks realize." Leonard lifted one eyebrow. "And what profile would that be?" Hale didn't answer, but he didn't need to. The silence answered for him. Silence, and the way passengers stopped pretending not to stare. A woman in her 70s, wrapped in a neatly pinned wool shawl, looked from Leonard to the officers, and back again, confusion etched between her brows. She whispered to her husband, "He looks like he belongs here, more than half the people waiting." "Why are they?" Her voice trailed off when the older officer's gaze swept toward her. She stiffened and looked away. Across the seating area, a young man in a bright Seahawks hoodie lifted his phone, pretending to check messages, but the lens pointed directly at Leonard. The recording light blinked once, steady and unashamed. Leonard saw all of it, felt each stare, each assumption, each doubt hanging in the air like dust caught in winter light. He inhaled again, slow, steady, letting the cold airport air fill his chest. His voice, when it came, was quiet, but edged with steel. "Sergeant, whatever paperwork you believe is missing, it isn't, and I'm not stepping anywhere until you tell me exactly who requested this little interruption." The younger officer shifted, clearly uncomfortable. It came from upstairs. "Operations office. Something flagged your reservation." Flagged. Another vague word with a blade tucked under its tongue. Leonard didn't look at the officers. He looked past them toward the jet bridge, where passengers in first class had already begun boarding. A woman in a cashmere coat stepped through the scanner without a second glance. A man in a navy suit laughed loudly into his phone. No one stopped them. No one questioned their paperwork. Leonard tightened his grip on his briefcase. He felt the weight of it, the documents inside the polished metal latch, the leather worn smooth by years of travel. He felt the weight of another life, too, the one he'd left behind in Cleveland decades ago. That life had taught him how to survive a room where he wasn't expected to belong. This life had taught him how to own one. He wasn't sure which one he needed more right now. A voice cracked through the tension. Sir, I'm so sorry, there's been a mix-up." A gate agent hurried toward them, breathless, clutching a stack of papers like they were a lifeline. She stopped short when she reached Leonard, forcing a smile that trembled at the edges. "Mr. Brooks," she began, but the older officer cut her off with a sharp raise of his hand. "Hold on, we're handling this." "No." The woman straightened her shoulders, something fierce coming alive behind her eyes. "You're not. This reservation was flagged in error. A system glitch. Someone overrode a corporate tag that shouldn't have been touched. He's cleared. Fully." Her breath shook as she added, "And someone in operations is already in trouble for it." A ripple went through the waiting area, soft but unmistakable. Sergeant Hale frowned. "Then why did we get a call?" The agent hesitated only a second, but it was enough to reveal she knew something she didn't want to say aloud. Something sharper, something personal. Leonard caught it instantly. "Who made the call, miss?" he asked gently. Her name badge glinted under the bright concourse lights. Shannon Reeves. She swallowed. "I'm not supposed to say." "Not supposed to is a strange phrase," Leonard said, stepping closer, lowering his voice. "It usually means someone knows exactly what they're doing." Her cheeks flushed. "Sir, please. Let me just get you boarded. The flight's on a tight schedule. We can fix everything once you're in your seat." But Leonard saw the truth in her expression. This wasn't a glitch. It wasn't random. Someone had interfered intentionally. Someone with access. Someone who wanted him pulled aside. He looked at her again, softer this time, but unyielding. "Miss Reeves, tell me the name." Her eyes flicked to the officers, to the passengers, then back to Leonard. She held the papers against her chest like a shield. Her lower lip trembled once before she steadied it. "It wasn't operations," she whispered. "The note came from a supervisor on this concourse. It said your ID didn't look authentic." The older officer stiffened. "That isn't what we were told." Shannon shook her head urgently. "I know. That's why I ran down here. The moment I saw the internal log, I knew something wasn't right. But the name," she hesitated again. "The name was redacted. Only senior staff can do that. Redacted. A word that didn't belong anywhere near an airport check-in system unless someone with authority wanted it hidden." Leonard exhaled slowly. The cold air tasted like metal. The younger officer, sensing the shift in the room, stepped back. Passengers were leaning in now, murmuring. The woman in the shawl clutched her husband's hand. The young man recording had lowered his phone slightly, eyebrows drawn tight. Leonard adjusted his coat sleeve. Then he gave Shannon a steady look, firm, controlled, the look of a man who had built a life out of surviving storms designed to drown him. "Thank you for bringing this forward," he said. "I know that wasn't easy." She blinked hard, then nodded once. Sergeant Hale cleared his throat and stepped aside with awkward stiffness. "You're free to board, sir." Free to board. As if he had ever been detained for a legitimate reason. Leonard didn't move toward the jet bridge. Not yet. Something in the air felt unfinished, a piece of the story still turned face down, and he wasn't leaving until he turned it over. He looked back at Shannon. "You said the note came from a supervisor. One on this concourse." Her eyes softened, sympathetic and scared all at once. "Yes. And you said the name was redacted." Another small nod. Leonard's voice dropped into something colder, deeper. "Then tell me this instead. Did that supervisor also board this flight?" Shannon's breath caught. Her eyes flicked involuntarily toward the first-class lane. Then she whispered the words that made the entire concourse go still. Yes, he did. Leonard felt his pulse shift, slow but powerful, like the moment before a storm breaks open. A supervisor on this concourse, someone with enough authority to hide their identity. Someone already seated in first class. Someone who did not want him on that plane. And yet that was exactly where he was going. Leonard stepped onto the jet bridge with the slow, deliberate poise of a man walking into a room he already knew too much about. The hum of the corridor vibrated through the steel floor, mixing with the sharp hiss of recirculated air. His footsteps were steady, but inside his pulse, drummed with a rising heat, he kept tightly leashed. The truth was no longer a shadow. Someone on this flight had tried to keep him off it. Someone with access. Someone afraid of him sitting in seat 2A. He reached the aircraft door and felt the temperature shift warm and slightly sweet, the way cabins always smelled before takeoff. A flight attendant in her early 40s greeted him with a polished smile that twitched when she recognized his face from the minor commotion outside. "Welcome aboard, sir." Her voice carried the subtle tremble of someone trying to pretend nothing unusual had happened. "You're in 2A, just to your left." Her name tag read Margaret Holloway. Her eyes, however, read something else. Concerned curiosity, maybe even the faintest hint of apology for something she hadn't done. Leonard gave a polite nod and stepped inside. The aisle was narrow lights, casting a soft, amber glow. Passengers in first class were already settled coats, tucked neatly champagne glasses, half raised. Conversations dropped by degrees as he walked past. He could feel eyes tracking him, some in confusion, some in quiet speculation. 2A waited for him like a held breath. He placed his briefcase under the seat with controlled precision, then sat adjusting his coat cuffs the way he always did before important flights. His mind, however, wasn't on ritual. It was on the question that had hooked into him like barbed wire. Which supervisor across the aisle sat a woman in her late 60s, wearing a deep navy sweater, hands folded over a leather-bound book. She stared at him longer than politeness allowed, not unfriendly, but searching as if trying to place him in a story she had once heard. A few seats ahead, a man in a beige blazer glanced back, offered an awkward half-smile, then returned to scrolling through emails. Leonard registered all of it, but his gaze landed on one person, the man in seat 1C, mid-50s. Salt and pepper hair combed with deliberate neatness. A dark blue lanyard, peeking from beneath his collar, quickly tucked away when he noticed Leonard looking. His body language was too casual, the kind built on authority rarely questioned. He lifted a newspaper, but his eyes didn't move with the text. They stayed fixed behind the page, watching. Leonard didn't react. Not outwardly, but something cold settled in the back of his mind. A possibility, a shape forming without clarity yet. He lifted his phone not to call, not to text, but to check the time. A simple movement, harmless, but enough to make the man in 1C lower his paper an inch, just enough to reveal tension in his jaw. The cabin door closed. The captain's voice broke overhead, steady and practiced. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be departing Chicago shortly. Please take your seats and secure your belongings." Leonard leaned back. The engines hummed vibrations rolling beneath his feet. He clasped his hands loosely and let his attention drift not to the passengers, not to the cabin, but to the thought he didn't want to voice yet. Someone with senior clearance redacted their own name. Someone on this flight. He had theories, but theories required patience. And patience was something he had learned long before life taught him power. As the aircraft taxied, the woman across the aisle leaned slightly toward him. "I saw what happened at the gate," she whispered. "That wasn't right." Her voice had the soft rasp of age and sincerity. Leonard turned his head toward her. "Thank you for saying so. Most people don't," she murmured. "They see something off, but they stay quiet. I'm Eleanor Price. I'm headed to Seattle to see my granddaughter." He nodded, appreciating both her kindness and her restraint in not pushing further. She hesitated, then added, "Some folks forget that dignity shouldn't be a privilege." Leonard's chest tightened, not with anger, but with an old grief he'd learned to bury beneath work and purpose. He gave her a small smile. "You're not wrong." Before Mrs. Price could say more, a movement flashed at the front of the cabin. A second flight attendant, a younger man with a crisp uniform and sharp posture, stepped into first class to make a quick head count. He paused when he saw Leonard. Just a moment. A flicker of recognition. Then he looked toward seat 1C. The subtle exchange of glances lasted barely a heartbeat, but Leonard's instincts caught it. The younger attendant seemed unsure, and the man in 1C seemed dismissive. Territorial. The attendant moved on quickly, but not quickly enough to erase the suspicion settling in Leonard's stomach. The plane lifted off engines, roaring Chicago, shrinking beneath the clouds. For several minutes the cabin was suspended in quiet. Only the hum of ascent, the rustle of newspapers, the soft click of seatbelts being loosened. Then, as if on cue, the man in 1C stood, stretched with deliberate ease, and walked towards the galley. Leonard watched him go. He didn't need to follow. He waited. When the man returned, he paused beside Leonard's row, just long enough to speak without looking at him. "Rough morning at the gate, huh?" Leonard didn't answer. The man continued, still pretending to adjust something in the overhead bin. These big airports, lot of confusion. People get flagged for all kinds of reasons. Best to let staff handle it. Leonard finally spoke low and controlled. "Is that your official advice?" The man stopped moving. Slowly he lowered his arm, then met Leonard's eyes. His smile was small, too rehearsed to be genuine. Just trying to be helpful. Leonard held his gaze calm but unyielding. "Are you?" The man's jaw tightened. He stepped back, offered a polite nod to Mrs. Price, then returned to seat 1C. He opened his laptop with fingers too stiff to match his easy smile from moments before. Mrs. Price leaned toward Leonard again, whispering so softly he almost missed it. That man, he walked onto the plane with one of the gate supervisors. I saw them talking. Looked serious. Leonard's pulse thudded, once heavy. "Are you sure he asked?" "I'm old and not blind," she murmured. Leonard's mind sharpened. It wasn't coincidence. It wasn't a glitch. And the man in 1C wasn't just another business traveler. Something deeper pulled at him, an old instinct from his early career before boardrooms and accolades, when he'd had to read every room like it held a trap. He breathed in slow. He couldn't confront the man now. Not yet. But he needed to understand who he was dealing with. He turned slightly in his seat and caught the younger flight attendant watching him again, that same flicker of concern, or was it warning, in his eyes. The attendant looked away quickly, but not quickly enough. Leonard exhaled, the cabin lights dimming, as the aircraft leveled into cruising altitude. Someone on this flight wanted him sidelined, but they'd made a mistake. They'd put him close enough to see their face. The moment the cabin lights dimmed into their soft, cruising glow, a different kind of tension settled over the aisle. Quiet, invisible, but undeniable, like the shift in air just before a storm breaks. Leonard felt it before he saw it. A ripple. A hush. A subtle rearranging of bodies and intentions inside that narrow space 30,000 feet above the country. The younger flight attendant badge reading Tyler approached with a practiced smile. But something in his step betrayed him. It was too rigid, too measured. He carried the drink tray like it weighed more than metal and miniature bottles ever could. "Can I get you anything?" Sir Tyler's voice was calm on the surface, but the edge beneath it sounded like someone bracing for an answer he didn't want to hear. Leonard considered him for a long second. "Coffee black." Tyler nodded once quick and sharp, then leaned in a fraction to whisper almost against his will. "If you need anything or if something feels off, just ring." Before Leonard could respond, Tyler straightened and walked away. Not retreated, walked away. Intentional. Controlled. But his glance over his shoulder told another story. Fear was following him like a shadow he couldn't outrun. Leonard sat still. He could read people the way others read, weather patterns, tremors, rises in temperature. Something on this aircraft was shifting, and Tyler wasn't part of the problem. He was caught in it. Up front, in seat 1C, the man with the tucked-away lanyard lifted an earbud but didn't press play. He wanted to look casual while listening. He wasn't good at it. "Mrs." Price across the aisle closed her book, watching everything with the sharp attention of someone who had lived long enough to know when a room was lying. The engines hummed steady but loud, a familiar comfort for frequent travelers. But today the sound felt like cover noise, meant to drown out things passengers weren't supposed to hear. Leonard unclasped his seatbelt with a soft click and stood. A few heads turned, subtle curious. He walked toward the galley, not too slow, not too fast, just enough to draw no attention and still control the room. Tyler was there, pouring coffee, with hands that trembled so faintly only someone like Leonard would notice. When he looked up, his expression flickered between relief and dread. "Sir," he murmured, "you shouldn't be back here." "Then tell me straight," Leonard replied. "Who is the man in seat 1C? Tyler froze, the pot in his hand stilled mid-pour. "I can't say. It's complicated. Most things worth hiding are." Tyler shut his eyes for a second, inhaled, exhaled. When he opened them again, something in him had made a decision. He set the pot down, voice now barely a breath. "He's not a supervisor. Not the way you think. He's external security liaison. Contractor. Not officially on our payroll, but has access to crew override systems for safety audits." Leonard's jaw tightened. Safety audits were legitimate tools used sparingly with strict protocol, but in the wrong hands they could manipulate passenger profiles, and his name Leonard pressed. Tyler swallowed. "I don't want trouble." "You're already in the middle of it," Leonard said softly. A long beat passed before Tyler whispered, "His name's Raymond Thorne." Leonard felt the name like a puzzle piece snapping into place, too clean, too convenient, too familiar. He had heard it before, years ago, during a congressional subcommittee hearing on aviation data breaches. Thorne had been linked to an internal leak that risked exposing medical records used in travel clearance. He'd never been charged, only reassigned. "What is he doing on this flight?" Leonard asked. Tyler shook his head. "I wasn't told. He boarded with early crew clearance, and he had a coded brief. I wasn't allowed to see it, but I heard him say something about a passenger of interest." A passenger of interest, a phrase loaded with implication. "Thank you for telling me," Leonard said. Tyler didn't look relieved. He looked terrified. "So please be careful." Leonard returned to his seat, every movement measured. As he passed row 1, he felt Raymond Thorne's gaze slide toward him, like a blade skimming skin. Back in 2A, Mrs. Price leaned closer. Young man, I've seen people look at others the way he looked at you. Doesn't come from curiosity. Comes from fear. And fear is the root of a lot of ugliness in this world. Leonard managed a quiet nod. She wasn't wrong. The aircraft hit a pocket of turbulence, then a subtle jolt that rattled ice in glasses and made overhead panels creak. A few passengers gasped. One man clutched the armrests as if the plane were falling instead of dipping only inches. But Raymond Thorne didn't flinch. He continued typing on his laptop, eyes sharp, fingers tapping slowly, deliberately, as if coding something that needed precision. Leonard watched him. His chest tightened. Something about Thorne's demeanor didn't match an external consultant. This was a man used to controlled environments, used to surveillance, used to having his decisions ripple through systems larger than any single passenger list. Mrs. Price reached over, touching Leonard's arm gently. You look like you're holding your breath. Breathe, son. Whatever he is, he can't hide the truth forever. Leonard offered a faint smile. I appreciate that. Just then, Margaret Holloway, the senior flight attendant, approached Thorne. Her voice was low but urgent, and Leonard caught only fragments. Restriction notice, why wasn't this disclosed? This could ground the flight. Thorne motioned her quiet with a subtle tilt of his hand. She stiffened her jaw, clenching. Not fear offense. Margaret was not someone accustomed to being dismissed. She turned away sharply, catching Leonard's eye by accident. For a split second, the mask slipped. She knew something, and she didn't like it. Leonard took that in storing it. Another piece. Then the plane dipped again, harder this time. Not dangerous, but enough to send a startled cry from the middle rows. The lights flickered, a drink spilled, and through the brief commotion, Raymond Thorne stood. Not to help, not to calm passengers. He walked directly to Leonard's row. Mr. Brooks, he said quietly, we need to speak. Now. Leonard didn't move. And who exactly are you to require that Thorne's eyes narrowed? Someone who knows you weren't meant to board this flight. A chill crawled along the cabin, invisible but undeniable. Mrs. Price inhaled sharply. Tyler from 3 rows back stopped mid-step. Even Margaret Holloway took 2 involuntary steps towards them before stopping herself. Leonard held Thorne's gaze. And why is that? Thorne leaned in just enough for only Leonard to hear. Because there's a federal marker tied to your name, and someone activated it this morning. I'm here to verify whether it was a mistake or something else. Leonard felt the air thin, heavy as fog. A federal marker. Those weren't used casually, and they sure weren't issued without a trail. But Thorne wasn't finished. The order wasn't signed, he added. No authorization, no timestamp, just a flag, a ghost command. And someone wants the truth buried before we land in Seattle. Leonard stared at him, heart steady but burning underneath. Who sent the command, he asked. Thorne's jaw locked. That's the problem. The signature data was wiped. Someone with high-level clearance, higher than mine. For the first time, Thorne looked unsettled. I'll ask again. Mr. Brooks, did you board this flight knowing you were being flagged? No. Leonard answered. Thorne's gaze hardened. Then someone isn't after me. Someone's after you. The engines roared louder, as if the plane itself reacted. Passengers murmured. The lights dimmed again. And for the first time since stepping onto the aircraft, Leonard felt something unfamiliar coil inside him. Not fear. Recognition. Someone on this flight had started a hunt, and they weren't expecting their target to hunt back. The cabin grew so still it felt carved from glass. Thorne remained standing between the rows, his body angled just enough to block the view of curious passengers, but not enough to convince anyone this was a normal conversation. Leonard felt the weight of eyes drifting toward them, then darting away like people afraid of staring at something dangerous. Mrs. Price's fingers tightened around her book. Tyler lingered near the galley, torn between duty and worry. Margaret Holloway watched from the front, her expression neutral, but her stance poised, as if she expected the entire cabin to tilt into chaos at any second. Leonard straightened in his seat. "Say the rest, Mr. Thorne." Thorne's jaw flexed, and for a moment he looked like a man torn open by two opposing instincts, fear and arrogance. His voice came low, barely audible under the hum of engines. "The flag on your name wasn't generic. It wasn't the kind used for travel alerts. It was marked internal. That means someone inside the system triggered it. Someone who knew exactly where you'd be today." Leonard kept his gaze steady. "And what does an internal flag imply?" Thorne didn't flinch. "That someone believes you're carrying something you shouldn't be." Mrs. Price let out a soft gasp. Leonard didn't blink. "And are you here to confirm or to accuse?" Thorne hesitated. "Neither. I'm here because the moment a flag like that activates, my job becomes containment. Not confrontation. Containment. A dangerous word. One that belonged in intelligence briefings, not first-class cabins." Leonard leaned forward slightly, his voice measured. "Why don't we start with what you think I'm carrying?" Thorne glanced toward the cockpit, then toward Margaret, then back to Leonard. His throat bobbed as he swallowed. "Not what?" "Who?" The single syllable chilled the space around them. Leonard narrowed his eyes. "Choose your next words carefully." Thorne folded his arms, lowering his voice further. "There's a theory going around in certain circles that someone is using your travel patterns as cover. Someone wanted on this flight without being logged. Someone who boarded under your shadow." A shockwave rippled through Leonard's chest, not fear, but furious clarity. A setup, a silhouette cast behind his name, a phantom passenger. Before he could speak, Margaret approached them, her steps firm. "Gentlemen, whatever this is, it needs to pause. The captain wants everyone seated. We're approaching heavy turbulence." Thorne's expression tightened. "This can't wait." Margaret's voice sharpened. "It will wait, or I will have the captain intervene." Leonard saw the surprise flash across Thorne's face. She wasn't afraid of him. She wasn't afraid of whatever power he carried in that tucked lanyard. Margaret Holloway was a woman who'd flown through storms too many times to bow to a man who hid behind authority. Thorne stepped back, but the look he gave Leonard was a silent order. "Don't move." Leonard didn't obey. He stood. Passengers tensed. The engines groaned as the aircraft cut through rough air, shuddering hard enough to rattle glasses and send a rolling shiver across the overhead bins. Margaret reached for Leonard's arm to steady him. "Sir, please. Just for a moment." Leonard didn't sit. He braced himself against the seat-back eyes locked on Thorne. "Tell me what you're not saying." Thorne clenched his teeth. "That someone boarded this flight without clearance. That the internal flag was meant to push you aside so they couldn't be traced. That if I don't find them before we land, my department will tear apart every passenger list, every gate log, and your name will be the center of the inquiry." Mrs. Price rose halfway from her seat, despite the turbulence, her voice trembling. "That's impossible. No one gets through airport security unnoticed." Thorne's stare flicked toward her. "They do if someone on the inside wants them through." The plane jolted again, harder. Lights flickered. A drink cart slid 6 inches before Tyler caught it, eyes wide, breath sharp. Leonard felt the turbulence but ignored it. He focused only on Thorne's words, turning them over in his mind, testing them against memory and instinct. And why, he asked, would someone believe I'd be the perfect cover? Thorne hesitated a fraction too long. Leonard caught it. So did Margaret. Answer him, she said, voice taut. Thorne exhaled sharply. Because your background, Mr. Brooks, makes you an easy target for suspicion when someone needs a distraction. No one questions a flag placed on a man who built his life from the bottom of a system that still doesn't trust him. Mrs. Price inhaled sharply. The truth of that statement landed like a blow. Leonard didn't look away from Thorne. Then you're telling me someone used my name as a shield? Yes. Or as bait. The engines roared as if the plane swallowed the word whole. Leonard leaned closer, lowering his voice. And are you here to catch the person who slipped through, or the one you think is their perfect scapegoat? Thorne didn't answer. His silence was admission. Leonard sat slowly, a storm gathering behind his eyes. Margaret pointed toward Thorne's seat. Sir, go back. Now. Thorne hesitated, then obeyed reluctantly. The moment he turned away, Margaret crouched beside Leonard's seat, one hand gripping the headrest. Listen to me, she whispered. I've flown 20 years. I've dealt with contractors like him. If he thinks someone slipped on board, he's not lying. But you need to know something. Leonard's pulse sharpened. Say it. His name wasn't on the crew manifest. Leonard stiffened. Are you sure I checked it myself this morning? She replied. If he boarded officially, I would have been notified. Someone added him after the door sealed. Leonard's thoughts snapped into alignment like falling dominoes. A ghost passenger. A redacted command. A contractor who wasn't on the manifest. And a target, him. Mrs. Price leaned towards them. What does that mean? Margaret answered before Leonard could. It means someone on board has more authority than the captain. And they don't want us knowing why they're here. Leonard turned his gaze back toward Thorne's seat. The man was typing again, but his shoulders were tense, his eyes darting toward the cabin crew, toward the aisle, toward the door to the cockpit, looking for someone, or waiting for them. The turbulence eased for a moment, leaving the cabin in a tense, suspended quiet. Mrs. Price's voice came soft, but razor-sharp. Leonard, is there anyone you can trust right now? Leonard didn't answer. He didn't need to. Tyler appeared beside him, suddenly voice, low, urgent. Sir, we've got a problem. A passenger in the back, she's claiming she was assigned 2A. The words froze the air. Leonard stood slowly, every nerve sharpening. Take me to her, he said. Tyler hesitated. Sir, it might not be. Take me, Leonard repeated. Passengers watched as he stepped into the aisle. Some whispered. Some stiffened. Some shrank back, as if sensing the story unfolding in front of them had suddenly become bigger than a misunderstanding. Tyler led him toward the curtain, dividing first class from the main cabin. The moment they crossed it, the noise changed louder. More chaotic passengers, talking babies, crying seatbelts, clicking. Row 11, row 12, row 13. Then Tyler stopped. A woman stood there, late 40s, dark hair, pinned tightly, hands clutching a boarding pass so hard it crinkled. Her eyes snapped up when she saw Leonard, and something flickered in them. Recognition, fear, or guilt. She pointed at him before he could speak. That's him. He took my seat. 2A is mine. Passengers nearby shifted, unsure whether to believe her. Leonard didn't speak. He looked at her boarding pass, and his blood ran cold. The name printed on it wasn't hers, and it wasn't his. It was a name he hadn't heard in years, a name he thought was buried, a name tied to secrets that should never have been able to follow him onto this plane. The woman took a step back, her voice cracking. I told them I didn't want to be in first class. I just needed to get here. Leonard stared at her heartbeat, pounding, because now he knew. He wasn't the target. He was the decoy, and the person they were hunting was already standing in front of him. The woman's breath came fast, shallow, like someone who had been running long before she ever stepped onto this plane. Passengers around her leaned back instinctively, sensing something volatile in the tight grip she had on her boarding pass. Her knuckles were white, the paper trembling between her fingers. Leonard didn't move. He locked onto the name printed at the top of that ticket, the name he had prayed he'd never see again. Evelyn Cross. It hit him like a sudden drop in altitude. Not fear memory. Years old, buried deep, wrapped in the kind of silence only powerful people respect. Evelyn Cross, the whistleblower who had once exposed a multi-state fraud ring involving assisted living facilities. A woman who disappeared under federal protection after her testimony nearly toppled a corporate empire. Her face had been different, then softer, younger, but the eyes were the same. A warning burned in them, the kind of fear that comes from knowing you have already been found. She clutched the seat back in front of her, grounding herself. "You don't understand," she whispered. "I didn't want to be here. I told them." Her voice splintered. "I told them they put me too close." Tyler stepped beside Leonard, unsure, caught between flight protocol and the instinct to protect someone clearly in trouble. "Miss, let me just confirm the boarding pass assignment." "No." She pulled the pass back to her chest. "You can't pull it up. They'll see I'm flagged. They'll know I'm not where I'm supposed to be." Her voice quivered on the edge of breaking. The passengers behind row 13 fell silent, tension spreading like a cold draft. Leonard spoke softly measured, but his tone carried weight. "Evelyn, look at me." She froze. The sound of her name pulled her gaze upward, forced her trembling hands to still. "How do you know because I was there?" Leonard said. "When the case broke, when the subpoenas dropped, when you walked out the back door of the federal courthouse, I saw you disappear." Her breaths came faster, shallow and panicked. "Then you know what they did to the others." Leonard kept his voice steady. "You were supposed to be protected. Witness protection doesn't just put people on commercial flights without clearance. Unless someone overrides the clearance," she shot back, chest rising. "Unless someone who wants you gone has access to the database." Her eyes darted toward first class, toward the place where Raymond Thorne sat, calmly pretending to type. Leonard followed her gaze. He felt the truth slot into place with an icy precision. Thorne hadn't been sent to watch Leonard. Thorne had been sent to intercept Evelyn Cross, and someone in the system, someone with more power than a contractor, had arranged for her to sit under Leonard's name. Not to hide her, to flush her out the moment his presence triggered a review. A perfect diversion. 2A had been the trap. Evelyn's voice cracked. "They changed my routing without telling me. Not even my handler knows I'm on this flight." Leonard stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Who rerouted you?" She shook her head. "I don't know. There were 2 redirection orders. One from the Marshal Service. One from someone else." Leonard felt the turbulence return, a deep rumble, shaking the cabin, as if the atmosphere itself reacted to her words. The overhead lights flickered twice. A baby wailed from row 16. An elderly man reached for his oxygen tube with shaky hands. He turned to Tyler. "We need Margaret. Now." Tyler ran. Evelyn backed away until her hip hit the armrest of row 14. "Don't involve the crew. If he thinks you're helping me, he'll act before we land." Leonard followed her line of sight again. Thorne had risen from his seat. He wasn't walking toward them. He was walking toward the cockpit. Margaret emerged from the front just as he reached the door. She blocked his path, one hand flat against the metal panel. "So the cockpit is restricted. State your purpose." Thorne's voice was smooth, cold. "I am executing a federal directive. Move!" Margaret didn't move. "Sir, unless the captain confirms your authorization, you're not crossing this threshold." His jaw clenched. "I don't answer to the captain." "Then you'll answer to me." Her tone held no fear, only authority carved from decades in the sky. For the first time, Thorne hesitated long enough for Margaret to lift the intercom phone. "Captain, we may have a situation." Thorne grabbed her wrist. Not hard, not violent, but enough to make her drop the phone. Passengers gasped. The curtain between first class and coach twitched as curious faces peeked through. Leonard didn't think. He moved. He closed the distance to the front of the cabin with a swift, controlled stride, arriving just as Thorne released Margaret's wrist. She stepped back, shaken, but still composed. Leonard's voice was low, icy. "Touch her again and you won't leave this flight under your own power." Thorne laughed once, quiet, humorless. "I'm not here for you, Brooks." Leonard stood between him and the cockpit. "You are now." Thorne's eyes narrowed. "Move." No. It was not a threat, not defiance. It was a simple declaration of territory, delivered by a man who refused to be used as bait. Behind them, the curtain parted. Evelyn stood, trembling, her fingers pressed to her lips. Mrs. Price hovered a few rows back, gripping her armrest with both hands, whispering a prayer under her breath. Tyler remained frozen at the galley, torn between calling the captain and rushing forward. Thorne adjusted his jacket, his tone chillingly calm. "She shouldn't be here. You know that. If she talks, people die." Margaret stepped forward again, face pale but resolute. "Then get a federal team to meet the plane." "But you don't get to make arrests in my cabin." Thorne's glare sharpened. "You're interfering with an operation." "No," she replied. "I'm maintaining control of my aircraft. Something you clearly don't understand." Leonard saw the shift in Thorne's posture. The calculation. The dawning realization that he had lost control of the narrative inside this sealed cabin. Thorne looked at Leonard. "You're making a mistake." Leonard didn't blink. "So are you." Turbulence struck again, violent shaking overhead compartments, throwing a few cups to the floor. Gasps filled the cabin. A shout rose from the back. A thud echoed near the galley. The plane steadied a moment later, but something important had changed. Every pair of eyes was watching. Every passenger knew this wasn't a misunderstanding. Margaret addressed the cabin through clenched teeth. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated. Everything is under control." But the lie didn't soften the tension. Fear spread through the rows like a scent. Thorne lowered his voice. "If you think I'm the threat here, you're more naive than I thought." Leonard stepped closer, his face inches from Thorne's. "Then enlighten me." Thorne inhaled slowly, then exhaled the truth, leaking out in a whisper, meant for Leonard alone. "I never flagged her." Leonard's heart struck a single hard beat. "I was sent to stop the person who did." He leaned in further, his breath cold against Leonard's ear. "And that person is on this flight." Leonard froze. Thorne's shoulders sagged, not in defeat, but in reluctant admission. "Look at her boarding record. Her change order came from someone with clearance above mine. higher than field operations, higher than witness security. They hijacked her route. They wanted her isolated, not dead, discredited. Why Thorne's eyes flicked toward Evelyn? Because she knows something new, something that makes her original testimony look harmless. Leonard's stomach tightened. What does she know? Thorne's jaw went rigid. Ask her. I can't. When Leonard turned, Evelyn was already watching him, her fear sharpening into something else. Resolve. I didn't want to bring you into this, she said. But someone used your name because they knew you'd react. They needed to flush me out without firing a shot. Leonard felt heat rising behind his ribs. Why me? Because you're known, visible. They can spin a narrative around you. But me, her voice cracked. I'm the one they lost, and they want me found again. The plane lurched slightly as it shifted course, leveling off. Thorne's voice came low, urgent. The real threat isn't me. It's whoever rerouted us. The cockpit received a mid-flight course correction 15 minutes ago. Someone wants us above federal airspace before we land. Leonard stared at him. Why Thorne met his gaze unblinking. Because up there, they can intercept us. And no one will question why a witness disappears again. The course correction came so smoothly that most of the passengers didn't feel it, but Leonard did. A subtle tilt, a drop in engine pitch, a new hum in the floor panels, deeper, more deliberate, like the aircraft itself had been given a quiet order. It didn't want to obey. He looked instinctively toward the windows. The sky outside had shifted shades, no longer the pale blue of a routine westbound climb, but a darker band of atmosphere that told him they were rising higher, faster, and not on the path he'd been shown on the gate display. Margaret Holloway felt it too. She gripped the bulkhead with one hand, eyes narrowing toward the cockpit. That's not standard altitude for this route. Thorne straightened. His voice dropped into something tight, almost resigned. They're taking us above general traffic lanes. That requires an override from ground command. Leonard's voice iced. Whose command? Thorne hesitated. Someone who wants to intercept us before we reach Seattle. Passengers nearby shifted in their seats, whispering, stiffening, sensing danger in the way adults sense storms before the sky turns. Before Margaret could respond, Tyler stepped into first class, his face pale. Captain says there's been an unexpected adjustment to our routing. He wanted me to reassure passengers, but he doesn't sound convinced. Margaret moved fast, pushing toward the cockpit door. Thorne followed, but she held up a hand sharply. Stay back. He ignored her and reached for the emergency call button beside the cockpit. Captain opened the door. We need to speak. There was no response, just a faint crackle of static. Then the captain's voice came over the intercom, too controlled to be natural. Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing a minor systems irregularity. Please remain seated. Everything is stable. Leonard looked at Margaret. That tone too calm, too scripted. He's reading from something, Margaret whispered. Not from our manual. A tremor of fear rippled down her spine, but she steadied her breath. Years in the air had taught her how to swallow fear, how to focus on the immediate, how to read danger in the tight corners between protocol and instinct. She knocked hard on the cockpit door. Captain Hill, it's Holloway. Let me in. A long pause, then a soft, muffled reply. Can't open it. Orders from above. Whose orders? Margaret demanded. Silence. Thorne leaned close to the door. Captain, did someone send an encrypted directive to your terminal? More silence. Then, barely audible, a red notice. No signature. Locked me out of my own system. Margaret stepped back, hand over her mouth. They locked out the captain. That's impossible. Thorne's expression darkened. Not impossible, illegal, and intentional. The plane jolted slightly, adjusting altitude again. Tyler stumbled, catching himself on an armrest. A woman in row 3 gasped, clutching her pearls. What is happening? Her husband tugged her back into her seat. Just sit still, Carol. Don't make a noise. The way he said it revealed a truth older than the both of them. Fear turned some people inward, others outward. Leonard turned to Evelyn, who stood frozen between coach and first class, as if moving might shift the plane further off balance. Evelyn, look at me. She forced her eyes to his. What exactly did you uncover? Leonard asked quietly. What did you see that made someone willing to hijack federal airspace? Her lips parted, trembling, the words wrestling inside her. Not numbers, she said. Not money. Not fraud this time. Then what people? The word hung heavy raw. What about them? Leonard asked. They're moving patients, she whispered. Not records. People. Elderly residents pulled from facilities after hours. No family notices, no death certificates. Transported across state lines without paperwork. Leonard felt the air narrow in his lungs. For what purpose? Evelyn's voice became a splintered breath. Drug trials, unapproved, hidden under shell companies, hundreds of seniors used like disposable data points. When I discovered the logs, I filed an internal alert, and within 12 hours my witness protection handler went missing. Mrs. Price gasped, hand over her chest. Dear God, Leonard steadied Evelyn with both hands. You came forward once. You survived. Why run now? Because someone inside justice falsified my protection transfer, she whispered. They wanted me isolated long enough to disappear. And now, whoever rerouted this plane, they want me silent before I reach the West Coast. Thorne stepped closer, tension coiling inside him. Evelyn's not lying. 2 weeks ago, my division intercepted chatter about missing protected witnesses. We thought it was rumor. Then your file pinged, and now this flight, his eyes hardened. We're not just rerouted, we're being guided. Leonard said the word aloud. Intercept. Thorne nodded once. Passengers shifted again, a tide of dread rolling down the cabin. Someone muttered a prayer. A man coughed violently, the sound rattling through the pressurized air. Margaret squared her shoulders. Then we stopped the interception. How we're a sealed tube miles above the ground. Thorne opened his tablet hands, flying across the screen. There are only 2 ways to intercept a commercial jet in federal airspace. One, force a diversion to a restricted landing strip, and the other, Leonard asked. Thorne swallowed. Mid-air detainment. Mrs. Price's book slipped from her lap pages, fluttering like lost feathers. Leonard's voice sharpened. What does that mean exactly? Thorne looked at him with apology buried under duty. A military escort. Forced landing. Full cabin lockdown. Everyone treated as suspects until they identify the target. And if they can't identify the target, Thorne closed his eyes, regret tightening his jaw. Then they assume none of you can be released. A baby began crying in coach. A man shouted at someone to calm down. The entire aircraft seemed to pulse with fear as the truth spread through invisible channels. Margaret inhaled deeply, grounding herself. We need the captain fully back in control of this aircraft. If someone hijacked his system, we break the override. Impossible mid-flight, Thorne said. Leonard's tone cut sharply. Try. The plane banked left too steeply for a commercial route. Drinks slid. Passengers yelled. A crying child shrieked. An oxygen mask panel rattled as if debating whether to drop. Thorne steadied himself on Margaret's shoulder and stared at the cockpit. Whoever issued this command thinks they're buying time. meaning they don't have full clearance yet. The intercept window isn't open. We still have minutes. Minutes for what Margaret asked. Leonard answered for him. To undo the override before someone else does. Thorne opened a secure program on his tablet. If the captain can confirm an alternate code phrase, we might restore partial control. But I need access to his voice, and I need someone to distract whoever is watching the cabin mics. Margaret stepped forward. I'll handle that. Passengers trust me more than any of you. Tyler swallowed hard. What do you need me to do? Keep everyone seated. Keep them calm. Do not mention the override. If they panic, we lose the cabin. Tyler nodded, determination replacing fear. Evelyn touched Leonard's arm. Why are you helping me? You don't owe me anything. Leonard met her eyes. Yes, I do. Because someone used my name to flush you out. Because someone wanted you erased under my shadow. Because someone thinks I'll stand still while they use innocent people as weapons. His voice lowered until it was almost a vow. They're wrong. The engines roared louder, vibrating the floor. Outside the windows, the sky darkened into a thinner, harsher blue. Margaret stepped into the aisle and took the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated. We're stabilizing our altitude. Everything is under control. Her voice didn't shake. It carried the steadiness of someone who had survived lost storms and more than one emergency landing. While she spoke, Thorne positioned himself near the cockpit door tablet, ready. Lean close, he whispered. The microphone inside the door panel can pick up your voice if you're within inches. When I signal, speak the phrase, Concord ignition. Leonard frowned. And the captain will hear it. Thorne nodded. It's a pilot-to-contractor failsafe, only used when someone hijacks communication. Leonard stepped in. Why me? Because the captain trusts your voice more than mine right now. The plane shuddered again. The wind outside howled like something clawing at the fuselage. Thorne signaled. Leonard leaned toward the door, the cold metal inches from his lips, and spoke with controlled force. Conquered ignition. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a click, a static shift, and a new voice, ragged furious, burst through the internal speaker. Who the hell ordered my aircraft into federal ascent? Who's overriding my flight commands? Leonard stepped back. Thorne's face paled. That isn't the captain. He looked at his tablet. The cockpit channel had been breached. Someone else was in control of the aircraft. The voice that burst through the cockpit speaker wasn't the captain's. It was lower, colder, scraped by something feral underneath. Each syllable carried the unmistakable edge of a man who didn't care who heard him because he believed every outcome already belonged to him. You don't give commands on my aircraft. The cabin froze. Even the air seemed to stop moving, as if the pressurized atmosphere recoiled from the sound. Margaret stepped back so sharply, her heel struck the bulkhead. Tyler gasped behind her. Mrs. Price clutched the armrest so tightly her knuckles drained white. Leonard's pulse slowed, but not from fear, from clarity. That voice wasn't improvising. It belonged to someone who believed the cockpit was his rightful domain. Thorne swallowed hard, his throat bobbing. That's not any pilot in Northern Skies' system. Before Leonard could respond, the intercom crackled again, louder, cutting through the cabin with the authority of a judge delivering a sentence. This plane is now under restricted navigation. Stay in your seats and stay silent. Margaret tore the handset from the wall. Identify yourself immediately. Silence. A long, suffocating silence. Then a soft, distinct click, the unmistakable sound of someone inside the cockpit shutting down their internal communication feed. Leonard's jaw tightened. They disconnected the crew. Thorne's voice shook despite himself. They're sealing themselves off. Whatever we do next has to be fast. Margaret gathered herself, spine straightening one vertebra at a time. Her voice was calm, but her eyes were bright with adrenaline. "Tell me how to help." Thorne checked his tablet fingers, moving fast. "The cockpit uses a 2-step firmware lock. If whoever is in there has overridden the captain's credentials, they've disabled pilot authority. But maybe not contractor authority." Leonard frowned. "You already tried accessing the system." "That was before we heard that voice," Thorne muttered. "Whoever took over hit us with a layer I didn't anticipate. But I might be able to breach the backup interface." Margaret steadied him with her tone. "What does that mean?" "It means," Thorne whispered, "we can try to force a partial reboot of the cockpit interface. It won't open the door. But it might give us communication for a few seconds." "And what do we do with a few seconds?" Margaret asked. "We warn ground operations that the cockpit has been compromised," Thorne replied, "and we give the captain a chance to fight back." Leonard listened, absorbing the words, the urgency, the fear running beneath everything. But one thought kept circling back. Someone wanted Evelyn trapped. Someone wanted Leonard distracted. And someone wanted control of the plane long enough to intercept it. He turned to Evelyn. "What exactly did you uncover? We need the details." Her eyes darted between Thorne, Margaret, and Leonard, her breath shaking. "I already told you." "No," Leonard said, softly but firmly. "You told us pieces. We need all of it." Evelyn pressed a hand to her stomach, as if trying to hold herself together. "The shells holding the trial data, they're not just falsified. They're encrypted using a federal cipher. Someone inside the Justice Department is protecting the project." Leonard's breath stilled. Thorne looked gutted. Which division? Evelyn's voice fell to a tremor. "Internal Affairs." Every head in the circle snapped up. Internal Affairs, charged with policing federal misconduct, should have been the last place corruption could root without consequence. Thorne took a step back. My God. If Internal Affairs is laundering the records, then whoever flagged her, Leonard, said did it from the only room in Washington, no one questions. A flicker of recognition passed through Thorne's eyes, painful, reluctant. "And you know who that is?" Leonard added quietly. Thorne's silence confirmed it. Before they could press further, the plane dropped. Not violently, but enough to draw shouts, curses, scattered screams. Drinks flew. A tray slammed to the floor. Someone in row 15 yelled that their seatbelt was jammed. The aircraft stabilized after several seconds, but panic clung to the air like electricity. Margaret lifted the intercom again, projecting calm with sheer force of will. "Ladies and gentlemen, remain seated. We're experiencing abnormal airflow, but the aircraft is stable." The lie carried strength because she believed in the need for it. Thorne rushed to the cockpit door, pressing the panel beside it. The secondary audio interface flickered to life with digital static. He mouthed, "Now." Leonard stepped close, too close to the door for comfort, and spoke with authority, sharpened by rising fury. "This is Leonard Brooks. Whoever you are, release control of the aircraft immediately. You're endangering over 100 souls on board. Identify yourself, and we will resolve this without further escalation." Silence. Then a laugh, a low, dismissive breath of amusement. "Mr. Brooks, I wondered how long it would take for you to step forward." Leonard froze. That voice didn't just know him, it expected him. Evelyn's hand flew to her mouth. No, it can't be." Thorne shook his head violently. "It's not possible. He was taken off the case." The voice came again, a smooth poison sliding through the intercom. "It's time we spoke, Leonard. You've been disrupting things you don't understand. And your friend Evelyn here, she's caused far more damage than she realizes." Leonard's body turned to stone. "Who are you?" The voice lowered into something cold enough to chill bone. "Someone you should have left buried." Evelyn stumbled back, nearly collapsing into a seat. Leonard caught her arm before she fell. "Tell me," he whispered. "Now." Evelyn's face twisted with dread. "His name is Daniel Mercer. He oversaw the investigation into the elder care fraud scandal. He was internal affairs." Thorne slammed a hand against the bulkhead. "Mercer was disavowed. Fired. He's not supposed to be anywhere near a badge." Evelyn shook her head violently. "He wasn't fired. He was repositioned. The department hid him, protected him. And he's the one who took my handler." The intercom popped again. "I warned Washington that the two of you together were too dangerous. And they ignored me. So now I'm forced to work independently." Leonard's voice hardened. "What do you want?" Mercer chuckled. I want her erased. I want what she stole returned. I want the two of you off the board." But most of all, the tone dropped into something almost intimate. "I want the world to think this aircraft vanished by accident." The cabin erupted in shouts as the plane dipped again, sharp enough that overhead bins rattled, oxygen masks trembled, and a flight attendant in coach stumbled into a seated passenger. Margaret grabbed the intercom, her voice a thunderous command. "Everyone stay seated. Lock your belts," Tyler shouted instructions down the aisle. Coaches cried, panicked voices rising like a tide. Thorne fought to maintain control of the tablet. "I'm trying to jam the false route instructions. The more he injects, the harder it gets. We need the captain now." Leonard stepped forward until his palm rested on the cold metal of the cockpit door. His voice didn't rise. It didn't crack. It cut through the chaos with terrifying precision. "Mercer, look at me. You're not taking this plane." A long breath filled the intercom, almost a sigh. "Leonard, you're still under the illusion that you're the man in the room." Then softer, deadlier. "But you forget I still have the controls." The cockpit clicked off. Thorne's tablet went dark. Margaret stared at Leonard, horror widening her eyes. "We just lost every system we were using." Leonard exhaled, slow and cold. "Then we find another way in." Because Daniel Mercer had made one fatal mistake. He revealed himself. The moment Mercer cut the feed, the cabin fell into a dangerous, vibrating hush, the kind of silence that forms right before metal bends, or people break. Leonard stood with one palm flat against the cockpit door, the cool aluminum steadying him, even as the aircraft trembled beneath his feet. He could hear his own breath, measured, deliberate, sharpened to a single edge. Behind him, the passengers' panic moved like a rising current, whispered first, then louder, a tension that crawled up the narrow aisle one heartbeat at a time. Margaret was the first to speak. Her voice was hushed, clipped, fighting not to shake. "Leonard, if he controls navigation, we need backup altitude support. Minneapolis Center should still be tracking us." Thorne shook his head immediately. "Not if Mercer locked them out. If he rerouted the transponder, they're seeing whatever he wants them to see." Tyler stepped forward, fists clenched, trying to hide the tremor in his hands. "So what do we do? We can't break down the door. We can't override him digitally. And the captain might be unconscious or worse." Leonard didn't turn. He kept his palm flat against the door, listening, sensing, almost feeling the vibrations inside the cockpit. Mercer hadn't moved far. He was standing close, too close. The air carried it. his presence pressed back through the metal. He finally spoke, voice low enough that Thorn and the others leaned forward to catch it. Mercer isn't working alone. Evelyn tensed beside him. What do you mean, not alone? Because Leonard murmured no single man can breach cockpit security, reassign flight routing, and override transponder output without inside assistance. He has someone feeding him everything he needs from the ground. Thorn's gaze dropped. You think it's someone at Internal Affairs? Leonard's silence answered for him. Margaret swallowed. So he has intel credentials and someone watching the radar charts. We're blind. Not blind, Leonard corrected quietly. Just outnumbered. For now. The plane jolted suddenly, a short, violent shimmy that threw a dozen passengers against their restraints. A woman cried out. An overhead bin popped open, spilling a jacket onto the aisle. Margaret grabbed the intercom mic, forcing her voice to stay calm. Ladies and gentlemen, we are experiencing unexpected turbulence. Please remain seated with your belts fastened. A lie again. But the kind that keeps people alive. Tyler moved to help a trembling older man secure his belt. Evelyn pressed one palm against her brow, trying to breathe through the pounding fear. Thorn braced himself against the galley wall, his tablet useless in his hand. Leonard stayed at the door. Then a voice, not Mercer, whispered faintly from inside the cockpit. It was hoarse, barely audible, scraping through static like someone fighting their way out of unconsciousness. Help anybody door fail, safe hidden left panel. Margaret gasped. That's Captain Dawson. Thorn rushed forward. Captain, can you hear us? Another crackle. Fail-safe panel, cabin left. Of. And then silence. Evelyn grabbed Margaret's arm. He's trying to tell us how to reach the emergency controls. Thorn scanned the bulkhead around the cockpit door. The wiring behind this section there could be a maintenance access, but it would only be reachable if someone disabled the decorative paneling. Leonard rose to full height. Look closely. Not where it should be, where a man hiding from Mercer would place it. They searched rapidly, fingers running along seams in the wall along the storage compartments. Margaret crouched down, checking the lower molding. Tyler pressed his ear to a section of paneling, listening for airflow changes. Evelyn stepped back to study the architecture like a puzzle. Then she whispered, I see it. A nearly invisible seam, narrower than a fingernail, hid where the left wall met a recessed safety placard. Thorn's eyes lit with recognition. Clever old man. Leonard didn't hesitate. He hooked his fingers behind the panel's lip, braced one foot against the wall, and pulled. It resisted, then gave way with a sharp metallic crack. Inside a recessed manual override switch glowed faint amber. Margaret covered her mouth. That means the captain activated it before Mercer knocked him out. Thorn leaned in. This doesn't open the cockpit door, but it might restore internal comms just for a second. A second could be enough. Leonard rested his thumb on the toggle. Ready, Margaret nodded. Do it. He flipped it. The cabin lights flickered. A faint burst of static rushed through the overhead speakers. Then Mercer's startled voice snapped through the system. What are you doing? Leonard stepped closer, speaking with lethal calm. Taking back what you stole. Mercer hissed. Leonard, don't do this. You don't know what you're interfering with. I know exactly what I'm interfering with. A brief silence. Then Mercer's tone shifted lower, measured, almost impressed. So the captain hid you a route in. That old man always underestimated his own cleverness. Leonard's voice hardened. Release the controls, now! Mercer barked a short laugh. You think this is about controlling a flight path, Leonard? I'm not trying to disappear this plane. I'm trying to disappear her. Evelyn froze. Her breath hitched. Leonard's fists clenched. Margaret grabbed the intercom. "Mercer, listen to me. There are over 100 people on this aircraft. And whose fault is that Mercer snapped? You brought them into this by protecting her. You should have let the system correct itself. Now every passenger becomes part of the math." Thorne slammed a fist into the wall. "He's insane." "No," Leonard murmured darkly. "He's cornered." The lights flickered again as Mercer fought the override interference. The aircraft dipped, then righted. Leonard felt the shift in gravity, the unnatural way the plane leaned into the air. He turned sharply to Thorne. How long can he keep fighting the fail-safe before it locks him out? Thorne's face went pale. If he realizes what we're doing, he could crash the system entirely. Meaning, Evelyn whispered. Meaning Thorne breathed. He could intentionally stall the plane. Another jolt rocked the cabin. More screams. A child cried out. Mrs. Price clutched her chest, and Tyler rushed to help her breathe. Leonard felt something inside him slip from resolve into something colder. He stepped to the intercom panel, ripped the handset free, and spoke with a quiet steel that cut through every sound in the cabin. "Mercer, look at me." A pause, a slow inhale, then a venomous amusement. "Always commanding the room, aren't you, Leonard?" "Here's how this goes," Leonard said, voice razor thin. "You believe you're done for, that eliminating Evelyn buys you leverage with whoever promised you protection. But you're forgetting one thing." "And what's that?" Mercer asked. "You're not the only one on this plane with access to the people who buried your case. And unlike you, I still know which pressure points break them." Silence. Margaret stared at Leonard, stunned. Thorne whispered, "What are you doing?" Leonard didn't blink. "You wanted me involved, Mercer. You have me. But you don't get her, and you don't get this plane." Mercer's voice dropped to a growl. "You don't scare me." "No," Leonard replied. "I don't have to. They do." The cockpit stayed silent. The cabin did too. Mercer finally answered, and his voice was different now, thinner, tightened, like a man feeling the first crack in a wall he thought was impenetrable. "What are you implying?" Leonard stepped closer to the cockpit door. "I'm implying that you're not the only ghost in Washington. And the people who protected you, they didn't tell you who I am." Margaret's breath hitched. Evelyn stared at him, as if seeing him for the first time. Mercer finally spoke, voice strained. "Leonard, who are you, Leonard?" Whispered, low and lethal. "The man they should have warned you about." And this time Mercer didn't laugh. Mercer did not respond at first. The silence that followed Leonard's words was not empty. It was weighted thick, the kind of silence that comes when a man realizes he has misjudged the size of the shadow standing behind him. The aircraft hummed, dipped slightly, then steadied, as if even the engines were listening. Evelyn pressed her back against the bulkhead, breath shaking. Margaret froze in mid-step, the emergency binder half open in her hands. Thorne watched Leonard with a kind of stunned reverence, as though he were witnessing someone he thought he understood peel away another layer and reveal something unrecognizable, dangerous, formed from years of secrets no normal executive should carry. Finally, Mercer's voice crackled through the speaker, lower now, quieter, threaded with the first trace of unease. "What division are you tied to?" Leonard did not blink. "If you were cleared to note that Mercer, you wouldn't be hiding on a commercial flight." Tyler, tending to Mrs. Price in row 4, looked over sharply. Passengers behind him craned their necks, despite the terror choking the cabin. Fear pulled people inward, but curiosity pulled them back out. Mercer exhaled slowly, the breath uneven. "You think name-dropping ghosts will stop what's already in motion?" You think I can't finish what I started? Leonard leaned closer to the door, his voice dropping to a tone that sounded like the quiet before a storm. Try it, and listen to what happens next. Thorne swallowed. But Leonard continued, a single cold sentence shaped around quiet fury. You so much as tilt this aircraft off a safe glide path again, and I will make sure every person who shielded you becomes public record by morning. Every transfer document, every sealed memo, every closed-door deal that kept you out of prison. Margaret's breath caught. Evelyn's eyes widened, the color draining from her face. Mercer hissed. You don't have access to those files. Leonard let the silence answer for him. When he finally spoke, it was soft, lethal. Mercer. I was on the task force that wrote the classification protocols you're abusing. I know where your case sits. I know who your handlers were, and I know how expendable you are to them. A strangled sound escaped the speaker, half laugh, half disbelief. They wouldn't burn me. Leonard's voice was a whisper of ice. They already did. The cabin shuddered, as though punctuating his words. Evelyn pressed her hand to her mouth, tears welling. Thorne leaned his head against the wall, whispering under his breath. My God, that's why the warrant logs had holes. They erased him. Leonard didn't look at him. His gaze stayed fixed on the cockpit door. Mercer, I know what they promised you. Protection, position, re-entry through a back channel. But I also know the truth. You're a contingency they never intended to keep alive. Mercer's voice rose, jagged at the edges. Liar! If you were still protected, Leonard murmured, someone would have picked up your call when you hijacked a commercial aircraft. Someone would have stopped me by now. No one has. They abandoned you the moment you acted alone. Static filled the line. Sharp, angry, panicked. Then Mercer snapped. You don't get to undo this. She exposed us. And no one walks away from that. Evelyn stepped forward, despite her shaking legs. She didn't expose you. She exposed the patients you hurt. People died because of the data you falsified. Mercer snarled. You don't know what those orders were, who they came from. You think you're righteous? You're a liability. You always were. Leonard snapped the intercom from Margaret's hand and spoke so sharply Evelyn flinched. You're not touching her. Mercer laughed, a brittle, unhinged burst. Leonard Brooks, the polished corporate man with the shiny reputation, the public servant who walked away with applause. I should have realized then. Leonard's eyes narrowed. Realized what, that you were never actually out, Mercer whispered. The cabin fell dead silent. Leonard felt something heavy settle inside his chest, a past sealed in steel, in oaths, in dark rooms, and burned files now scraped open in front of frightened passengers on a failing aircraft. Mercer exhaled shakily. That division you worked for, people still talk about it in whispers, about the man who would take impossible assignments because he believed morality was absolute, the one who vanished from the field and reappeared years later with a spotless business resume. You're him, aren't you? Evelyn stared at Leonard with new eyes. Margaret's grip tightened around the intercom cradle. Tyler froze mid-step. Thorne muttered, barely audible, I knew it. I knew something didn't add up. Leonard stood motionless. The engine's low drone filled the gap where an answer should have gone. Mercer barked a dark laugh. And here you are, pretending you're just an executive on a plane. You destroyed careers, Leonard. You tore apart networks. You left bodies. You think I forgot? Leonard's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed level. You were never supposed to be in my orbit again. Mercer spat back. And yet here we are. You the ghost. Me, the failure they buried. Evelyn whispered, "Leonard, what is he talking about?" Leonard didn't look at her. He couldn't. Not yet. Mercer's voice sharpened. "So what now? You storm the cockpit. Break the door. Shoot me with a weapon you don't have. You're out of moves. I'm the only one who can land this plane." Thorne stepped closer, voice cracking. "Leonard, his last statement. He's not bluffing. He's either a decent pilot, or he has Dawson conscious enough to stabilize things under threat." Margaret swallowed hard. "If we push him too far, he crashes us." Leonard exhaled slowly, every muscle in his body coiled. There was no aggression in him now, only calculation. He spoke softly into the intercom, every word measured. "Mercer, listen carefully. This ends with you alive. It ends with the truth surfacing the right way. But only if you listen. Look at the pattern. No one is answering your calls. No extraction team, no ground contact, no safe house ping. They sealed your exit routes, didn't they?" A trembling breath leaked through the speaker. Leonard pressed on. "You think I'm your enemy, but I'm the only person who still understands how to get you out without dying on this plane. Let the captain go. Give me partial control of navigation. We'll land in Des Moines. Neutral ground, no federal traps." Evelyn's eyes widened. "Leonard, you can't negotiate." His hand rose, silencing her. Mercer's voice cracked like a man whose mind had reached a cliff. "You'd negotiate for her." After what she uncovered, Leonard's answer came instantly. Yes, and not just for her, for everyone on board. Silence again. Long. Agonizing. Then Mercer whispered, "You're lying." Leonard's reply was absolute. "I don't lie. That's why you fear me." The speaker crackled violently, as if Mercer had slammed something in the cockpit. Breathing heavy, erratic came through next. Then a sound none of them expected. A faint, broken voice, the captain again strained and barely conscious. "Leonard, don't trust him." Thorne gasped. "He's awake." The captain coughed sharply, a painful, wet sound. He's armed. Don't open. Don't." A thud. Then silence. Evelyn clasped her hands against her mouth. "Oh, God." A soft metallic click echoed through the intercom. Mercer was back. "You're too late. The captain's not getting up again." Leonard's gaze darkened into something cold enough to kill. Mercer's voice softened into a chilling whisper. "So, Leonard, if you want to save them, you'll have to come through me." The plane dipped again, sharper this time. Margaret grabbed the armrest. "We're losing altitude." Thorne's voice shook. "He's forcing us down." Leonard stepped back from the cockpit door, shoulders squared, a clarity burning behind his eyes. Evelyn grabbed his arm. "Leonard, don't. You can't fight him." He looked at her finally. Really looked. And in his eyes, she saw something terrifying and holy. At once, a man prepared to sacrifice everything, even the life he rebuilt, to stop the past from taking one more innocent soul. "Yes," he said softly. "I can." The plane shuddered again, lights dimming. Leonard turned to Margaret, voice firm. "I need every able-bodied passenger moved to the back, 6 rows. Secure the elderly. Brace positions ready. Thorne, you're with me." Thorne stared at him. "What are you going to do?" Leonard laid his palm flat against the cockpit door one last time. "End this." And in the humming dark of the failing aircraft, the truth settled like weight. This wasn't just a hijacking. It was a collision course between a ghost from the shadows and the man who walked away from them. One of them wasn't leaving that cockpit alive. Leonard moved down the aisle, as if the narrow cabin were a war corridor he had walked 1,000 times. There was no hesitation in his stride, only a controlled determination that made passengers instinctively press back into their seats to let him pass. Behind him, Thorne followed with trembling hands but steady eyes clutching a metal service tool Margaret had quietly slipped him. The plane shuddered again, a sickening dip, but Leonard barely reacted. His focus was locked forward. Margaret steadied herself against a seat and called out in a firm, practiced voice, "Everyone remain calm. Stay buckled. Move only if directed." Her control kept panic from breaking wide open. Tyler assisted Mrs. Price, guiding her further back. People murmured, prayed, stared. Some cried quietly, but they all watched Leonard, sensing in their bones that the fate of every soul on this plane was now attached to the broad, unmoving lines of his shoulders. Leonard reached the bulkhead just outside the cockpit door. He placed one hand against the cool metal again, not in hesitation, but in acknowledgement. This door had become the dividing line between the world he had built and the world he had walked away from years ago. A breath slipped from his chest, slow, controlled final. Thorne whispered behind him, "If we trigger the emergency manual override too hard, it'll jam permanently." Leonard nodded. "We're not forcing the door. We're forcing his hand." Thorne swallowed. And if he fires that weapon, Leonard didn't answer. Some truths didn't need speaking. The intercom sparked alive with Mercer's voice, colder now, coiled tight with something unstable. "Leonard, I can feel what you're doing. Don't touch that door." Leonard spoke softly, the way a surgeon might speak before making the cut. "I'm coming in one way or another. You know I don't bluff." Mercer's breathing sharpened. "You think you can intimidate me? After everything you did, after everything they did? No. This ends my way." Leonard leaned forward until his lips nearly brushed the metal. "Your way gets everyone killed. Mine doesn't." Silence. A long one. The kind that reveals the fracture line in a man whose grip on control is slipping. Thorne tapped the side panel lightly, listening to the inner mechanics. The backup latch is still unstressed. If he disengages the motor lock, I can slip the fail-safe in. But only if he loosens security by choice. Leonard's tone dropped into something grave and resolute. "Then we get him to choose." He raised his voice, calm, steady, commanding. "Mercer, listen to me. You're exhausted, cornered, abandoned by the same people who told you you'd be untouchable. There's a way out that doesn't end with your blood on the cockpit windshield." Mercer exhaled shakily. "And you're offering this out of compassion?" "No," Leonard answered. "Out of strategy. Because a dead man gives us nothing. But a man who talks, a man who names names," Leonard's voice turned razor sharp. "He becomes the most dangerous witness in Washington." Thorne blinked in shock. Evelyn froze where she stood several rows back, hanging on every word. Mercer let out an unsteady laugh. "You're trying to recruit me now. I'm giving you a chance to live." Leonard said. "A rare thing for someone in your position. Drop the weapon. Open the door. Let Dawson go." The plane dipped again, harder this time, a stomach-lurching tilt that sent gasps rippling through the cabin. A passenger screamed. Luggage rattled overhead. Margaret steadied herself with one hand on a seat back, the other braced over her heart. Mercer spoke again this time, almost whispering. "I didn't want this. I didn't want any of this." "They forced my hand," Leonard pressed. "Then help us expose them. Give yourself a fighting chance in front of a jury." A jagged breath crackled over the intercom. Then Mercer's voice trembled. "You have no idea what they'd do to me if I talked." Leonard answered without hesitation. "And what do you think I'm offering? A fight you can survive." A heavy thud sounded from inside the cockpit, the sound of someone stumbling or someone changing position. Then another voice, broken faint, leaked through the speaker. "Leonard Dorr, now." Thorne gasped. "That's Dawson. He's conscious." Leonard stepped aside immediately. "Captain, if you can hear me, disengage the primary latch." A pause, a struggling breath, then a soft, mechanical click echoed through the panel. Thorne's eyes widened. "That's it! That's the first lock!" Mercer snarled, suddenly panicked. "Don't you touch that second one, Leonard. Don't." Leonard didn't flinch. "You lost control the second Dawson woke up." Mercer's voice rose frantic. "I will crash this plane. Do you hear me? I will nose-dive us straight into the fields if you push me." Leonard lowered his head, eyes closing briefly. When he opened them, there was nothing left of the polished executive. Only the operative remained. "Then you'll do it with me, standing on the other side of this door," he whispered. Thorne slid his fingers under the panel's edge. Margaret steadied the frame with a trembling hand. Evelyn pressed both hands to her lips, whispering a prayer into her palms. Leonard gave a single nod. Thorne pulled. A sharp metallic snap rang through the cabin as the inner latch disengaged, releasing a hiss of pressurized air. The cockpit door didn't swing open, not fully, but it shifted just enough to break its seal. A gunshot cracked through the cabin. Passengers screamed. Margaret ducked. Evelyn fell back against a seat. Tyler shielded Mrs. Price with his body. Leonard didn't move. The bullet had missed him by barely an inch, embedding in the wall beside his head. Mercer screamed from inside, voice breaking with pure rage. Stay out, or I swear," Leonard pushed the door. It opened halfway, revealing chaos inside. The cockpit was dim, lit by red emergency lights. Captain Dawson slumped against the wall, bleeding but conscious, one eye half open. Mercer stood unsteady near the throttle quadrant gun, shaking in his hand, sweat pouring down his face. His eyes were wide, wild-cornered. The moment Mercer saw Leonard, something inside him cracked. "You ruined everything," he choked. "You ruined me. And now you want to pretend you can save me." Leonard stepped inside, slowly. One hand raised the other, gripping the doorframe. "Put the weapon down." "No," Mercer sobbed. "They took everything. My job, my family, my name. They buried me alive." Leonard's voice softened, not with sympathy, but with truth. "And you chose the darkest way out." Mercer's arm faltered. The gun dipped slightly. Dawson coughed blood, speckling his lips. Thorne whispered from behind Leonard. "If he drops the weapon, we can restrain him." "Leonard, we have a chance." Mercer closed his eyes. Tears slipped down his cheeks. "I just wanted my life back," he whispered. Leonard stepped forward. "Then end this. Let us land the plane. Let the truth surface. You don't have to die here." Mercer's lip quivered. His grip loosened. And then, with a broken shudder, the gun slipped from his hand and clattered to the floor. Thorne lunged, sliding into the cockpit to secure it. Leonard caught Mercer by the arm before he collapsed. Dawson blinked weakly in relief. Margaret cried out in the cabin, "We have control!" Leonard eased Mercer into the jump seat, while Thorne helped Dawson regain manual controls. The aircraft steadied angle, leveling engines humming smoothly once more. Evelyn sobbed into her hands. Passengers clapped, prayed, held each other, overwhelmed with relief. Margaret's voice filled the cabin, breathless but composed. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are regaining full stability. Please remain seated while we prepare for emergency landing procedures." Leonard turned to Mercer, exhausted, triumphant, hollowed by what it had taken. "You did the right thing." Mercer looked away, tears silently streaming. The plane descended through thick Midwestern clouds as sirens and emergency vehicles waited below on the runway. Relief swept through the cabin like a warm wind. Evelyn met Leonard's eyes with something like awe and grief intertwined. Thorne pressed a hand over his heart, overwhelmed. Margaret wiped tears discreetly with her sleeve. Leonard exhaled slowly, finally allowing his body to release the tension he had carried since the first moment Mercer's voice entered the cabin. He glanced back at the passengers at the lives that would continue because he had stepped forward. And then, in the low hum of descent, he felt something he hadn't felt in years, the still unwavering certainty that he had done exactly what he was meant to do. If this story gripped you, if you felt every moment of tension and every breath of hope, hit like and subscribe for more. And drop 3 words in the comments that say what this journey meant to you.